that they're taking over of Eastern Europe. A whole host of reasons because of that, which ultimately ended up being a big, empty flawn that ended up just deflating because with lack of support. I would say that's why I'm a Trotskyist.
It seems as though I would have two objections. I mean, one is perhaps overly pedantic, but one I would say is then I think it would be there's two arguments I think against your position. One is practical and historical, and the other is theoretical. One is I would. You obviously don't have to do it now on the spot, but I would actually encourage you to name, right, the five revolutions for each one, that the Soviet Union was successful. I mean, you've got every single country in Eastern Europe. You've got Vietnam, North Korea, Cuba.
North Vietnam.
Yeah, North Vietnam, which later becomes Vietnam. I mean, that's a pretty good track record, and nuclear weapons. See, unlike a lot of the Western capitalists, the Soviet Union wasn't religious. And I don't mean this in any pejorative sort of way, but a religious belief can often encourage you to do things that from a geopolitical scheme are not rational in a strict political sense. For example, the Soviet Union was deeply concerned about being obliterated by nuclear weapons, whereas given the historical record we have, it's not so clear that John F. Kennedy was. And so, I mean, given that, it seems that, as a matter of fact, the Soviets did a very good job of creating and securing revolutions, or the quote-unquote Stalinists. So that's the historical point, which you can address. And then the theoretical point is this. Isn't this at least slightly hypocritical for a Trotskyist to say, given that, and to be fair, I'm not criticizing Trotsky for what I'm about to say, but isn't there an argument that Trotsky drowned in rivers of blood the anarchist, Makhnovist revolution in Ukraine, and also the workers' uprising in Kronstadt? It seems, which I do accept the logic of Trotsky at that time, which is, even if it's a popular movement, if it objectively threatens the revolution, it should be crushed as peaceably as it can. I mean, most of the Kronstadt sailors were given amnesty, but still it needs to be stopped. Doesn't that then become hypocritical when one of the main criticisms of Stalin is, rather than having worker power, you have crushed the world revolution? So that practical and theoretical criticism, how would you respond to that?
As far as the world revolution is concerned, I think these are different things, in my opinion. Honestly, I think that the drowning of blood of Kronstadt, I think that this is something that they resorted to as a last measure. They had no choice. There are a lot of things that were going on in the country just surviving. As a republic, they came within a millimeter of losing everything. I think that was the reason why that happened, why Kronstadt was put down. I'm sure there's all kinds of arguments against what they did. It's obviously looking back nowadays, it's different. It's easier to make overall criticisms. I think in general they probably were forced to, just like they were forced to do Brest-Litovsk, which was the treaty that gave all this land to the Germans. The German monarchy, which is a horrible thing to have to do, but I think that they were probably forced to, given the situation. However, for me, it's not a question, again, it's not a question of drowning in blood, as horrible as that is, and I also think that there's a question as to what that actually means. It depends on where, and when, and what exactly when you say drowning in blood. Now, when I'm saying world revolution, I'm talking about world revolutions in countries that were not achieved precisely because the Stalinists were literally murdering the revolutionaries. Because of that, the revolutions in these countries were not achieved. Capitalism was maintained. This is a different situation than the Soviet Union. Say what you want about Kronstadt, they maintained a worker state there, workers' property relations, whatever your criticisms of the Bolsheviks. They did not overthrow property relations. They were the biggest defenders of it. This is very, in my opinion, completely opposite of what was happening in other countries where they were prevented from doing that. The Stalinists literally prevented the revolutions from taking place.
Quick interjection. Could you name one of the countries that you were referring to?
Sure. Germany, France,
Time period.
Italy. Yeah, the German, well, I mean, there's initially several revolutions in Germany. In 1923, it was still kind of up in the air what was going on in Russia. But the leadership had decisively moved in our opinion, had moved more toward the bureaucracy at that point. There was, the German Revolution in 1932 that ended up with Hitler taking power. There was in France in the 1930s, the same time period, 1934. In Spain, in 1931 to 1939. And I wanted to note also, as far as you mentioned Vietnam, it's an important point, especially as far as Mao is concerned. Mao militarily attacked Vietnam, on more than one occasion, and actually caused a significant number of the deaths of the Vietnamese because they were siding with the Soviet Union, because they weren't kowtowing to Peking. So I just wanted to point that out. It seems like, the fact that they had a North Vietnam. Why was there a North Vietnam? Well, Stalin brokered a deal with the imperialists to carve up the world in a very bureaucratic fashion. Obviously, we're supporting the overthrowing of property relations in Eastern Europe, but workers were already mobilizing there. The independent initiative of workers was stopped as a means of maintaining total control over the movement, and they stopped it in other countries where it was going, like in Greece, for example, around the same period, right after the war. There should never have been a North Vietnam. The Vietnamese and the Koreans had the whole peninsula. They had both. They already had it. They won it after World War II. They won it during World War II, and the Stalinists handed half of it back. And in my view, while it's true that they did eventually win, although generally against different Stalinists at different times, it was against them. It was not something that was supported. It was supported half-heartedly, if it was at all. And it was and this is precisely what I mean by the bureaucrats can't lead to socialism, and that's why we oppose them, not because we're about uber, eighth dimension democracy. But precisely because they can't do that. They have specific class interests that are different from working people. So at any rate, that's my view on it. There's a whole host of 1968 in Europe. I know there's a lot of differences of opinion about whether that was still Stalinist. In our view, Stalinism. I guess I should clarify this point. Just like I was saying before, Stalin, it was a personality. People could argue that Hitler and Mussolini were different in many ways, but the same fundamental characteristics exist in both. Excuse me. The same fundamental characteristics exist in both, and we feel the same way about Khrushchev and Stalin. That both of them represented, the bureaucracy of the Soviet Union at different times, different points, and so. Our view of Stalinism is not about the individual. Obviously, Khrushchev spoke out against Stalin. So did Tito. Tito and Stalin Tito was the leader of the Yugoslavian Revolution, and Enver Hoxha had his own issues in Albania.
Mao had issues with Stalin as well.
Yeah, they all had issues with Stalin. The guy in North Korea, Kim Il-sung, right? He had issues with all of them, and he had his own little, I don't know how you pronounce it, UK theory or Uche or something. But they all had issues with each other. But the reality was, in our opinion, there's really no fundamental difference. The way that they function is the same way as proletarian Bonapartists. Much the same way as fascists exist on top of capitalists. As an irritation, even a murderous one that they have to put up with. Because there's a vacuum of leadership, and there's no way to replace it at the moment.
Well, does anybody have any other further questions they'd like to address?
Wow, that was almost 10.
Close to 10.
Oh, yeah. This is not.
Can I sit down so I'm not?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to continue,
Firing
if you
squad?
want to continue the discussion, yeah, sure. I can change the battery as well if we're going to do that. I mean, does anybody want to continue with discussion? Yes.
Whatever's clever. We should probably call it a day, and then usually it turns into the hour afterwards.
All right. Well, let's give our speaker a hand. Thank you for coming down.